Darren, can you regenerate a place without regenerating the people in it?
How long do you want this podcast to last? Because I can give you the short answer or I can give you a 4 hour answer. The short answer is yes, not the 4 hour answer. I'll try and elaborate on. It depends what you mean by regeneration, because there are two types of regeneration. There is what we call standard regeneration. You see it across all parts of the country and certainly see it in London. But then you have something called inclusive growth, what I call inclusive growth. And historically, that's when you make change happen to empower people. And that's what I believed in from the very early days of me working as a politician, technically. But really, what was I? I was a community champion. So in my very early days in politics, some 20 years ago now, I wanted to know why people went to the extreme. So my community went to an extreme. Whether that be left or right, I'm not fussed. I wanted to know why. And that was because people felt disconnected. They felt devalued. They felt they didn't have a purpose in place anymore. And that happens when people have been thrown aside, cast aside, whatever you want to call it. And I remember when I first started as the leader of the borough, I changed the narrative. Our slogan for the borough was one borough, one community, no one left behind. And that was really, really important, because whenever you are doing inclusive growth regeneration, what you're looking to do is something more than just regeneration. Regeneration as a rule is about property uplift and land uplift. Inclusive growth is, of course, both of those things, property uplift, land uplift, but also empowering the existing community. And that's really, really important, because you've got to build. Regeneration will always happen. It's the tides of change always happen. You can't stop change from happening. What you need to do, though, is make sure it's inclusive to the people that are there. So in my framework of inclusive growth, as I talk about it now in the consultancy, I talk about the power of three. I talk about the 5 steps to change. I talk about the 7 themes of conversation and the 42 building blocks, as I see it, that give you the answers to what that place will become. And it's all about the 3 Ps: people, purpose, and place. Because everyone wants a value, they want a purpose. They want to know where they stand in society. So what do we all want as a rule? We all want a home that's permanent, warm and safe, and truly affordable. Secondary to that is whether you buy it or you rent it. You want to live in a community that shares your value. So whatever your values are, you want to feel that that's aligned to the community's values as well. And that's really important, because if that aligns, you feel safe in the community. And then thirdly, you want that community to be aspirational, as you are for your children. So that is the first triangle from a resident point of view, from a community's point of view. With local government was set up to very much be the parent of the community. And for many years it did. All local government was. What I had to do was change the narrative of what we were doing in local government to not be the parent anymore, but to be the partner of the ambition of that community. So the role of the local authority was to find the facilitation mechanisms for the ambition of the community of Barking and Dagenham, and at the same time find the partners, both public, private, voluntary sector, who would invest either time and money to make that happen. And then from the private sector point of view, of course, we live in a capitalist system. So what we actually need is the ability for the investor to get a return, a developer to make a profit, but also the community to be empowered. So what I was able to do, after listening to tens of thousands of people, doing more consultation, as I was told at the time, than the borough had ever done, basically listen and respond. So I remember one of the first moments of change, telling the community that we were ambitious, telling the community that we wanted to get investment in, telling the industry that this was a place to look at, was when I came up with Barcelona-on-Thames. Then there was Mini Manhattan. Then there was the road in Riviera. Then when there was Digital Dagenham. Then there was London's Hollywood. What was that actually saying? Well, at different levels, it was telling the community that actually the world was their oyster. But in truth, it was telling investment that actually there was an opportunity here to look to come and invest in a community that had been left behind. So Barking and Dagenham, in its ONS, so Office of National Statistics, had statistics that matched Blackpool or Burnley or Scunthorpe and other northern towns or Welsh villages. But we were on the side of London. So what I had to do was get both the industry, the authority, and the community to work together as a combined entity to be able to deliver the housing and the opportunities that the community were asking for in a way that hadn't been done probably in my lifetime. And that's what I started doing. So when you look at what we were able to achieve in my leadership, I built 20% of London's social affordable housing between 2019 and 2024. I was acknowledged as being the largest council house builder in England by Inside Housing back in 24 as well. We were the only London borough to drop temporary accommodation year on year for 5 years.
Well, you don't like the word social housing though, do you?
No.
That's not a thing that I read that about you.
Yeah.
Why?
You're a young chap. So social housing is a derogatory term saying...
Is it like Scotland's, like you call it a scheme? Like people in Scotland, they get called schemies, if you will.
Yeah. So you've got to understand where it come from. I grew up in the time when actually most of us lived in council housing. The Becontree estate, the estate that I love, is the largest council estate ever built in the country's history. And I still live there and I love it. I've moved around it. I've never moved off of it, in effect. Yeah. But in the early 80s, the world changed. The right to buy came in. And there was nothing wrong with that. But what happened was the people that were on social security benefits, the social, yeah, they got branded because they were in council housing. And over time, that went from council housing to social housing. But actually, it went further than that. The Becontree estate was built for Homes for Heroes. So in 1921, the largest estate in the country's history started to be built. It was pretty much finished by 33, totally finished by 35. Henry Ford saw it being built the largest factory outside of Detroit in Dagenham, okay? So when you look at it, this very aspirational indoor toilets, electricity, gas, gardens, pivot fences, people had a lot of civic pride and social responsibility, and lots of structures come from that in our community. Through my lifetime, especially much when I was a young man, I saw all of it. But then I saw this absolutely dismantling of that community structure when the right to buy came in, because it pitted neighbours against neighbours on, I'm better than you because I can buy my house where you can't, or you've chosen not to. And that's where the term social housing actually comes from. It comes from the fact that people on the social were not able to buy their property. So I see it as a derogatory term, not like I see council housing as a very positive, because it actually originated for Homes for Heroes, the people that fought the First World War.
Came back and had a house to live in.
That's right. And we did the same across the whole country. We built for Britain. So we did it after the First World War and we did it after the Second World War. Now, for me, and whilst I was in the roles that I was with London councils, the local government association to do with housing, regeneration, planning and community, after COVID, we should have seen that straight away. We should have done it before COVID. But certainly in COVID, it showed, for me personally, how everyone has a value. Because if those people that did the mundane jobs hadn't have done those jobs, the NHS would have fallen over. Barking Station, as I understand it, was the busiest train station in the country in COVID. Why? Because the poorest communities had to go and do their jobs regardless, so they wouldn't be paid. Yeah. So actually what I wanted to see was a new wave of understanding that everyone has a value, and that's what I linked into what we were doing in Barking and Dagenham. So I call it the community rent model. And that was where we had different levels of rent, plus ownership, you could buy as well, but were truly affordable at levels based on your income. So you paid no more than 40% of your income into a rent. And if you improved your income, your rent would go up, but the proportion you paid would go down.
I see.
Yeah? So what you're now doing is with a community rent model, you're now doing what I call flexi tenure. So your rent will flex based on your circumstances. And what that allowed us to do was get a better return for the money that we were investing in the housing stock that we needed to take people off the waiting list.
But do you see that, or did you find that? Because my cynical brain goes straight to, well, people are going to play that system.
They can't. The data won't let you.
So they pay less. So let me just get it right. When they earn more, they effectively pay less.
They pay percentually less, but they pay more rent.
Yes, correct.
Yeah? So what's happening is society says, you know what? We recognise your earnings, we recognise your situation, and we will give you your property at sub-market levels. Yeah? Well, actually, that's what council housing's always been about. Yeah. Right? It's about allowing someone to flourish in their circumstances, paying the rent that fits their situation. Now, when council housing was first built, the Becontree estate, as I said, we had Fords, we had other companies, lots of companies, and it was really good. And that happened around the country. So if you take a traditional system, the state was like the mum. I'm going to go back to mum and dad. The state was like the mum. You was educated, you was looked after, you was given a home, made a home.
The homemaker.
That's it, the homemaker. And business was like the dad. They told you where you was in society. They gave you your pocket money, how you behaved, so on and so forth. And
very true, like almost like a very traditional family setup.
Absolutely. Yeah. Right? The only problem is mum and dad had a divorce about 50 years ago. Yeah, it's called deindustrialisation.
They haven't worked out in court yet.
And they still haven't worked out in court yet. So actually what happened was mum was left on the benefits. So mum was actually given less benefit year on year, local government, but mum was asked to look after nan and granddad, aunts and uncles, a few cousins. So the demand on
mum... And go out and get a job as well.
Absolutely. And go out and try and bring in money through commercial means, get a job. Right? So using that scenario, of course, some councils fell over. Some councils tried their best and it didn't quite work, right? Again, I looked at these examples on how I could put the framework together to allow us to get the best out of the private sector whilst having the values of the public sector, which actually empowered the community. Yeah?
So the money of, essentially, the old school values, the money of dad with the values of mum.
Got it in one, right? So why did that all work back then? Well, 95% of any community was pretty much on the same wage in their locality. So one factory, if you take a factory, you had one factory, 95% of the workers earned that money. If you did well, you were in a few other tiers, but that was a very small amount of people, managers. Yeah. If you take that same situation today, though, that same factory building, there's now 30 different companies in that factory building, with a much more wider range of people's incomes in that facility, right? So unfortunately, what we've still got today is the politics of the 20th century when it comes to housing, because we only talk about council housing or council equivalent housing, social housing, as you wanted to call it. Well, market rent.
I won't be calling it social housing anymore. I'll say that for free.
Market rent, and then for sale, But the truth is that's really, really limited in the thinking, because and these figures are not right, but I use this as the example. 10% of the most vulnerable can be supported by the system today, give or take. 10% of the most aspirational and wealth can look after themselves. Unfortunately, though, the 80% in the middle are the ones arguing over the market rent. So whether that be TA, whether that be you privately, whether that be the government nationally with asylum and so on and so forth, we're all arguing over what's left. Well, then that means the demand goes up, which means the costs go up because someone says, oh, I can make money out of this. And that's why I think it's saying like £28 billion is being paid in housing benefit. Well, that's going to individuals. What it's not doing is actually improving the state and our society's situation. So I wanted to come up with a system which said, okay, we need to make sure there's no poor doors, no gated communities. We need to make sure that people pay a genuine wage that can support them, whilst at the same time, they pay what they can afford, which will then support others. On a staggered basis. So that's where the community rent model in itself come through, and that's how it allowed us to invest both public and private money into doing the biggest house building program we'd seen since the Beacon Tree was built. And it worked. And so what I now try and do is I now try and get organisations, both public and private, to understand the roles they need to play if they're serious about doing regeneration that is inclusive growth. Because lots of places, and I talk to other councils and leaders and ex-colleagues of mine, and they say, oh, we already do inclusive growth. And I go, no, you don't. You do good regeneration, but you're not thinking of the whole, you're only thinking of the part. So if you take an apprentice, every building site has apprentices that the council have said in the 106 agreement and so on and so forth, you've got to take these people. That's great, but what happens when that site finishes? How do they get from Barking and Dagenham, if I take my area, to Barnet or to Merton or to Croydon, where the next site's going to be? Because remember, they're on the lowest wage in the situation of that of
well,
the building
also,
community.
Though, there's no incentive, and London is sort of unique in this, in that someone in Barking wouldn't fulfil the Section 106 for someone in Barnet.
Absolutely.
So it's actually it's irrelevant whether they can get there or not. They couldn't fulfil the Section 106 anyway. So why would anyone want to take them on?
Well, the thing is, what we're doing is we're defeating the very purpose of what we're trying to do, which is build the growth of the built environment, right? And people forget that the built environment actually is 1 in 8 jobs in the UK. The built environment sector is the largest sector in the country. It's about £568 billion, 3.8 million jobs in total, if you take it all together. But it's like a sleeping giant. It's twice the size, I believe, from the financial services or culture and leisure. So actually what we need to start saying is, how do we facilitate allowing young people to be able to see that there is an opportunity for them, no matter their attainment at school, no matter their ability, actually there's a job. So it's the most inclusive sector in the country. And I was really proud that when one of the things I got a building company to do, Waits, with Be First, the wholly owned council company, we did top trump cards. And it was about not all the jobs, but a lot of the jobs you could get in the built environment sector and what you needed to do. So, like the old top trumps when it used to be cars or whatever. Well, we did it on the built. And it was a really good thing. And I remember going into one of the schools and saying to children, who earns more, the leader of the council, bearing in mind I was suited and booted in those days, or a scaffolder? And of course, like 80%, 90% of the kids would go, you do, sir. Well, actually, it was a scaffolder. Yeah.
People, I talk about that. I'm fortunate enough to talk about this a lot on here. Most bricklayers earn more than doctors.
Oh, absolutely.
Work that out.
Well,
and then you wonder why you've got a skills gap, because actually, with this big hole in construction where you've got people of the sort of the older generation who are looking to retire, and you've got like some people in their 30s.
I think the average is about 55 now, isn't it?
I think it's maybe slightly low, but it's around the 50,
around that.
50 to between 50 and 60, certainly.
Yeah, so I'm a bit late for starting into this world, but it is important. I really am as old as I look. It's
our paper round.
A hard life. So it's about saying to people, look, there is a career here. It's the only industry where you could start off as the yard sweeper and end up the CEO of the company. I mean, it takes a few steps. I don't
know if you know Lee Marley. Well, we had Lee Marley on the podcast, and he was an apprentice.
Yeah,
and in his own volition, he was a rubbish bricklayer.
Yeah.
But he started as an apprentice, and now he's this year will be his first year turning over 100 million.
That's it, which is great, isn't it?
So 30 years on or whatever it is.
Which is what that's. Look, many developers who I class as friends. Tony Pidgley was one. God bless him, he's dead now. But he was a really good friend of mine. He had an awful upbringing when his story. But what an incredible man. He knew what he wanted to do, and he looked after people. I mean, you didn't want to. He was a hard businessman, but, his heart was in the right place. He knew it was about empowering people. I tell you, one of the things me and him came up with, we were sitting there one day and I was joking with him and I said, Tony, have you ever used a bus? And he went, well, of course not. Right? So I said, blimey, I said, London councils spend all this money so you can have a freedom pass. I said, and you've never used it? He went, no. He said, I don't use trains either, Darren. So I was like, okay. He said, and I can't remember his driver's name, but he said it's Bob. He had Bob outside. So I was like, right, fine. Right. So I said, wouldn't it be good, Tony, if what you were able to do as a multimillionaire, and if you think the square mile has more multimillionaires than any other part of the country, if as a multimillionaire, you could gift for a period of time of 2 years, your freedom pass to someone who's an apprentice. I said, now what that does is it takes the biggest blocker away from that young person being able to start in your career. I said, and if we did that, I said, and it's administered by London's councils, I said, all you do these days with computers, you just transfer and say, Tony Pidgley, now go into Darren Rodwell Jr. Not that there is a Darren Rodwell Jr., but you get the drift.
Billy the bricklayer.
That's it, Billy the bricklayer, right? Or Catherine. Yeah.
Construction worker.
That's it. And it's really important because I knew, talking to the young people, of which we have many, we had the largest growth of young people anywhere in the country at one point, their biggest block was travel. I knew that my community wouldn't go into London because they couldn't afford it. Yeah. So it was like, what can we do to help the industry help itself? I mean, another one I came up with, and again, I was trying to get the councils to look at this, and LGA at the time, was I said, planners, I believed that we should allow, as part of your training to become a planner, of course you've got to go to university, I get that, but actually you should spend some of that, you should spend 6 to 9 months, whatever it was, or a year, of your degree in placement in a local authority. And then if you chose at the end of your placement that you wanted to stay, then the local authority would effectively support that decision, and so would the industry. Because the way I looked at it was, the biggest issue about planning, I mean, if we go back 40 years, 80% of planners were in local government, 20% in the private sector. It's now reversed itself. Yeah. So I said, well, actually, if we were able to put funds, every developer, every person in the built environment sector, there was a little, and I mean a little, few pence surcharge, on going ring-fenced into planning and into skills. Actually, what that would do is that would massively improve the very problems everyone's complaining about around planning. And what that would allow is someone who would normally earn quite a lot more money if they went into the private sector could then stay in the public sector, which would then help the private sector do the development that everyone needs it to do. And it was just those sort of things. It's been practical about the challenges we actually see. And if all of us play our part to a greater or lesser degree, actually all of us will benefit in a much wider degree. And that's very much how I looked at all of what I tried to do, and what I now try and support, say, public and private entities in thinking about. So that critical friend of saying, you know, if you've got a planning application, what does the community want out of that? What do they want to see? Because institutions see red lines, they see wards, they see maps. Communities see doorsteps, streets and neighbourhoods. So it's how do you bring the two together? And I did a piece of work, I won't say for whom, but it was 10,000 homes, so a new town. I've written about these before. I mean, and I did this piece of work where I was a critical friend, where I sort of said, well, look, I get what you're trying to do, but think about it in this way, from the community's perspective. Think about it that way from the elected members and the officers' perspective, you know, whilst I was thinking about what they needed to do as a business. And it's fair to say they were very happy that I was able to be that critical friend. It wasn't saying it's rubbish, it's saying think of it from their perspective. If you want to get things through planning, you need to think from where your biggest obstacle is and work backwards. And again, if you look at my planning department of the council, using the structure of Be First, so when we brought in the development investment planning company, wholly owned by the council, decisions were still made by the members, but we knew that if anything came through Be First had to conform to the members' policies. Yeah?
There's a whole bunch of stuff that I want to pick up on there, because all of this is gold. And I think the people that listen to this will have already got huge amounts of value. When you do inclusive growth, not regeneration, because as you say, regeneration is just putting money in other people's pockets or in generating money for people who own stuff, essentially. And I really like the idea of the council housing and council owned stuff that's also an investment from private equity, essentially. Is that something, because that's being done a lot now. So Cambridge have got an investment partnership, Harlow have got an investment partnership, and it's sort of, I say it sort of started in Barking. It kind of did start in Barking, really. And I know I'm sort of massaging your ego a little bit. It did start in Barking.
That's very kind. I should have married you, not the wife. Look,
what I'm getting at is what works about that? Because
so you've got to go back.
Because people want to make money.
Okay, but let's go back. What is council housing? It's BTR. It's build to rent, right? Okay. Yeah. Well, we've been building build to rent for over 100 years as the state. Before that, Cadbury, Roundtree, Peabody, Guinness,
all the best firms.
Yeah, but all of them understood for their business they needed to improve their community. They didn't do it because actually what it did was make them a profit. They did it because over a longer period of time, it would make them even more profit. Yeah. Yeah.
Because people want to live there, work there. They don't leave. Retention.
Loyalty. Yeah. Education, so on and so forth. We've lost the understanding of what the institution's role is with the citizen's role. Yeah. So if I go back, as I said before, when we had the mum and dad scenario, the one factory, you knew what your purpose was. You knew what you was asked to do. We built community structure based on what was going on in that local community. So the industrial towns, the brass bands, the flower shows, the events we put on around was all part of the structure, the layering of what it meant to be in that community. And industry played their part in that. What I'm saying is, and this is why I now talk about housing as a single entity. Yeah, right. So the biggest growth of this country, we already know, is building. Right now, it's fair to say that at the moment our economy's flatlined. Well, is that a surprise if a quarter of your GVA is basically flatlined? Well, no, it's not, right? No. So what we've got at the moment is we've got this situation where we have the community saying, we do not feel connected, we do not feel valued, we do not feel we have a purpose. We have the industry saying, well, we can't fund everything you want us to fund in the way you want us to fund it. And the banks won't lend it even if we wanted them to. And then we've got the government saying, we've got no money to fix the problems because we're spending out on the problems in the old ways of thinking. Yeah. So when you look at it in that respect, and again, I use this as a scenario. After the First World War, we lost the empire. We were broke. Yeah.
Fair assumption. Well, fair summation of what facts happened. Yes.
Yeah. Right. After the Second World War, yeah, we had rationing. We were broke. Yeah. Right. And we'd lost pretty much all of our empire by then.
They didn't call it the Great Depression for nothing, did they?
That's it. Right. So after those two major situations the country found itself in, what did the government of the day then do? The government of the day became the guarantor for the biggest house building programs the country had seen at that moment in time. So after the First World War, we had the Homes for Heroes. After the Second World War, we had all the housing that was built for the bombed out locations. The problem is the government saying we've got no money, but actually they have, and they can. They can borrow money, they bond market, they can do all this stuff. They can and should, in my opinion, be the mechanism where both public and private partners who are building for communities should be able to then invest and get a preferential rate. So I'll give you an example of something I wrote about just recently. There's 1.7 trillion of savings in this country today. About 528 billion of that gets less than 3% of return. Yeah.
I listen to a lot of business podcasts. I think that's just disgusting.
Yeah.
Why are we? Yeah.
Right.
Carry on.
So,
sorry.
Work on that basis. There's 528 billion out there where people are getting less than 3%. Wouldn't it be a great idea if we had a new housing bond that guaranteed the investor 3%? I know I'd put some of my money that I'm getting less than 3% into it. It improves my life chances and choices. But at the same time, what it would do is there would be a new fund that we would be able to use for social affordable housing and retrofit. Yeah. So the government would be the guarantor. Us, the people, would be some of the investors. So we put our money in expecting it's an ISA. You know, you put it in for a long period of time and you get a guaranteed 3%.
The difficulty is, though, with that, and I love it. I think I do genuinely think that's a great idea. But people are people, and people.
Yeah,
If
you work on the premise that they're getting less than 3%, you've got 528 billion where they'll go, oh, you're not going to get all that money. But I worked it out. You'd get about 40 billion, that you'd be able to use in helping to kickstart the housing market.
I guess the difficulty is though that, if you use, let's take the mum and dad scenario again, Michelle, right? That's my mum's name. Michelle is out there and she doesn't have any savings whatsoever. She doesn't feel like she's being listened to. She doesn't feel like anyone's able to help her.
Okay.
She doesn't have any savings, so your initiative is great for the people who do. Yeah, but she's not an investor. She's a beneficiary of the investment. But because people are people, they don't feel like, And I've spoken to people who are in the benefit system, and it's a really dark. It can be a really dark place. I mean, you've been the leader of Barking and Dagenham for a long time, and I'm sure you spoke to a lot of people.
Look, I was in that space. See, you see me as the ex-leader of Barking and Dagenham. You see me now as a consultant. You don't see me when I was growing up in the 70s, and my dad was unemployed, and we got food from the vicarage and the clothes from a jumble sale. You don't see the fact that I was the youngest recorded single parent man under the Children's Act of 1990 in Romford County Court, when actually I used to have to sit at the DSS, demand that they give me money for the baby I was looking after, because the benefit system didn't recognise men as single parents. All right, and live on what I call daddy pizzas. You didn't see the fact that I couldn't get a council place because there was none to be had. So I had to do something to look after me and this baby.
And that's
so
point.
I've
That's
lived
what I'm getting
this
to.
world, right? But in all that time, I had aspiration to have a better world for me and my then daughter. I've now got 5 kids. It's a long story, right? So what I'm saying is, all of us, no matter where we are in society, can play their part. So, as I said, first of all, government, yes, it's broke. I'll accept that. Everyone's got a national debt. Fine. Yeah. Right. But they can still borrow. They can borrow and be a guarantor and effectively and lend money to the developers, both public and private, that can effectively get it at the right rate so it makes house building viable. All right. Tick. Great. Then there's the people with investment, people that have savings. Yeah. As I said to you, there's 528 billion, give or take, that gets less than 3%. Right. Well, again, those citizens can work with the government, and the government can say, we'll give you an ISA that guarantees 3%, but we'll borrow that money to help build those homes. Yeah. Retrofit some of those homes. Cost of living crisis. If we take your mum, Michelle, right, in that situation, all right? And then there's Michelle. And because she doesn't have money, doesn't mean she doesn't have a value, right?
No, but the difficulty is and this is what I'm trying to get at, how do you give someone like Michelle, I mean, my mum is actually like one of the...
Listen, your mum's wonderful,
but how do you give that person who doesn't feel like they're worth anything a value in the system? Okay. And that's what I want to get to.
Okay. That's the crux of the matter. You've got to understand, 1 in 8 in my community at the time were single parents. I'd say the Office of National Statistics, I had more in common with Blackpool and Burnley and Scunthorpe than I did with the rest of London. These people have been left behind. These people have been told they were no good. Again, I'm not going to go back and I'm not going to get political, but too far or too much.
No, but you can get as political as you like.
But in the 80s, to mask the unemployment levels, lots of people were put on disability benefits. And I used to joke with some of my friends, and nearly for 10 years, by the way, I was a benefits advisor. All right, so another one of my many jobs. All right, so I was talking to these very people that were the most impoverished, but they all had aspiration. They all had the feeling that something better could happen if people invested in them, right? And that's what I did in the structures that I do. That's what I believe in with inclusive growth. And when I take people around on the inclusive growth tour, which I do in my car these days, I used to do it in a minibus with people, investors and other people. I still do the tour because I want to show people that it isn't just about the housing. It's the green spaces, it's improving the schools, it's the innovations in industry, it's the locations of aspiration, it's all of that stuff. People respond, and they respond in a positive way. And what you do is, if you get civic pride, you get social responsibility. And lots of people I take round, they go, blimey, I can't believe how clean it is. There's no graffiti on the walls. But we're still talking about the most deprived communities in the country living on those estates. 20 odd food banks, 5 social supermarkets, still a large number of people unemployed or people with disability or other additional needs. But the truth is, their value is there. So whilst under the Office of National Statistics, we were seen as the most deprived area in the country, on the same statistics of the census, we're seen as one of the happiest places in the country because people, no matter their financial situation and wealth, their emotional community feel was it had vastly improved. They felt a value. And this is what I was saying earlier. So if we take that person who has no money, and I'll accept they have very limited funds, but that isn't all about them as a single person. They could be really good at art. They could be really good at organising things. They could be a person that people down the street go to help them write a letter. Yeah? So it's about understanding the value of a person and what part they can play in the purpose of the place. And that's what I was able to achieve in Barking and Dagenham. And politically, people go, well, how do you know if it worked or not? Well, I got the highest proportion of vote in London's history as a leader of a council twice. So the last, now bearing in mind, you think in under a decade, there'd been a lot of people have been voting for the far right, the BNP, people like that, right? On the 2022 election, the amount of people that voted, or the proportion of people that voted for my administration in effect, was 79.6%. Now, I can't tell you whether I was a great leader or not, because actually that's just a title. What I can tell you was I was a great community champion, because I made every part of our community feel that they had a value in people, purpose and place. And they responded by voting the way they did because they wanted that to continue. And it was part of what I call the master vision. It was part of that 30-year where we're going. It goes beyond politics. Actually, I have lots of people that would never have voted for my party, but they would vote for me because they believed in the same vision that I believed in. All I was doing was articulating their vision.
So who... I'm really interested now. So 79% of the vote you got.
Yeah.
Who didn't vote for you, and why do you think they didn't vote for you? And I'll get onto the second part of that question after.
That's fine. So first of all, I can't tell you who didn't vote. Thank God it's still a democracy. You don't know who.
But what sort of person didn't vote for you?
Well, for whatever reason, some of them would be ideology. Yeah. Some of them would be, frankly, they just didn't like me. That's fair enough. People don't have to like everyone. Some people, it would be that they were loyal to the party that they've always been loyal to. What was really interesting for me was I was happy to listen to those people and ask them what would improve. And I always used to say there's a third, a third, and a third. There's a third of people that will go over the top with me. Yes, let's go. There's a third of people that go, yeah, you go over the top and we'll see if you get your head shot off. And if you do, we won't follow. But if you don't, we'll follow. And then there was a third that said, don't matter if you pave the streets with gold, we're still not going to go there. And you've got to accept that. And again, if I take that in planning terms, when we done the film studios, the largest data centre in the UK at the time and the largest life science facility on the globe, we didn't get one single objection by the community living around that industrial estate. Not one. In fact, 27,000 homes went through planning. When we started, we were 338th, I believe, out of 341 planning authorities. Within 4 years of starting up Be First, I think we were in the top 3 of planning consents. Year 4, we were number 1, and it's stayed number 1 since. So I had the best planning department. I was building the most amount of housing and social infrastructure. So it wasn't just about the housing, it was about the place. It was about people's purpose and aspiration in the place. I was showing industry partners where the world was going. So I remember we did the first stacked warehousing for SME. We did the first industrial residential. We did the House for Artists, which was another first, where it was artists paid in conventional cash payment, but they also paid some of their rent in time running a community facility for the wider community living in that location, right? Because it had a value, right? We did the first modular 50-metre pool on the globe. Why? Because we had Paralympians, because we had the busiest swimming pool in the country, 86% of the time, and the Paralympians could only get 1 week in 32 at the Olympic Park. Now, they were never going to win gold if that all could happen. So,
is that the same pool?
Go on.
I used to run a skate park. I used to run. I used to run Legacy in Benfleet,
right?
And with the team, obviously. Yeah. But Nike did something at the pool in Dagenham. Must have been like 12, 13 years ago now. But that was another one of those. So the pool, there was a swimming pool in I'm pretty sure it was in Barking.
Yeah.
That got closed. Basically, it was like an old swimming pool that got closed.
Yeah,
and they went in there and made a skate park in the swimming pool for about a month.
That's right. That was the old leisure. That was the old leisure centre in Barking, which actually now, when it's finished development, it's going to be BTR. There's some business space there, and it's going to be a cinema. The new leisure centre next to it got opened by Her Majesty the Queen, God bless the soul, and the Duke of Edinburgh in 2015. And I remember doing a speech on the balcony of the Broadway Theatre with Her Majesty and His Majesty beside me, and my mum and my children and a few of my grandkids the other side of me, and I was pretty nervous that day, I can tell you. Right? But we opened that swimming pool. But yeah, these are the sort of things. So that's the meanwhile use. So again,
there's people flocking all over. Like we travelled for an hour to get there.
Well, but this was the whole point. People have civic pride, and if you invest in them, everyone wants to feel wanted. Everyone wants to feel that they have a connection. And so one of the things, again, I go back to is if you invest in people, they'll give you a lot more than you've invested in. Yeah. And that's what allowed the council to operate the way it did. In the companies that we owned, that we'd set up to do this regeneration. So we had like Be First, we had Reside, we had BD Energy, and BD Group, which was the FM side of things, right? Those companies were making the equivalent at one point of us putting our council tax up by 30%. So all the money that these companies made went back into the community. All the facilities these companies worked on improved the community. And what then happened was our community responded. So if I take our schools and our children, when I first started as leader, they were 68% good to outstanding Ofsted. That was lowest in London and lowest in below the national average. By the time I'd finished, I'd basically brought in two, and we were talking to a third university, into the borough. I had improved, I say it was a we, starting with the young people themselves. We improved Ofsted markings for our schools good to outstanding to 97%, whilst building the equivalent of 20 new schools, and some of those were special schools. We had the most inclusive schools. So the least amount, whilst we had the highest youth population, nearly 1 in 3 were under the age of 24, we had the least amount of kids being kicked out of school. So what was happening was, they as young people were feeling invested, they responded. Their parents were feeling invested, they responded. I make it sound really easy. It wasn't.
No.
There was a lot of layering that went on. The summer of festivals, the skate park you're talking about, all these things connected together. We did something called the Wall of Shame. Other councils followed. And that's where we would name and shame people using the data and understanding that we had a lot of buy-to-let landlords dumping their rubbish out on our streets. And we were effectively collecting rubbish for a borough twice our size because of all this fly tipping. So we put up cameras and asked people to tell us who they were. And they did. People did. They didn't want to walk through rubbish.
Fly tipping on the streets, for sure.
Now, what then happened was it went further. They said, well, that's great, but give us the pickers and the bags and we'll start collecting the rubbish because we know you don't have the money anymore to do it all yourself. But if you pick them up from this agreed location, thousands of bags continue today being collected on a weekly basis by residents of Barking and Dagenham because of civic pride and social responsibility.
And I guess as well, behind that is the empowerment of doing it.
Yes.
But also it goes back to that, the idea that the team had about giving people something for doing that. So someone goes out, picks up rubbish, maybe they get a deduction on their rent, or they get some extra.
There was no.
But I'm not saying that is what happens, but that is one of the ways.
Do you know what?
Getting someone like Michelle, the single mum, to go and kids are at school during the day. How can I feel valued in my community? I'll go out and do something for somebody else.
But that's the whole point, right? So they didn't need a financial reward per se. What they got was a better living environment. Yeah. And if you take the Michelle, so before I got into politics, I effectively was a chair of a tenant residents association. Now, none of us on that group got paid for anything. No. Yeah. Why did we come together? We came together because our local park had become a place of antisocial behaviour and other social issues. And what I wanted to do, and I remember it was Queen Mum's birthday. This is how long ago, when Queen Mother was alive. It was her birthday, and we wanted to do a street party. But actually, when we knocked on doors, people were like, "Oh no, we can't," or "This is a problem.
We're not going to that park."
That's it. We're not going to that park, and so on and so forth. That got me and a number of other neighbours then talking, going, well, we need to think about this because it's clear the local authority isn't, right? So we fundraised and we did stuff, and we were able to get grants that the council couldn't, and we redesigned the park, and we did all this stuff locally. And then some people said, oh, you should be a councillor. And I'm like, oh, I'm not really into that sort of thing, but okay, I'll give it a go. I thought the BNP. Then I became the leader. Then I did this stuff for London, and I did stuff local government family. And then they said to me, become an MP. Now, that didn't quite work out, but it doesn't mean I haven't lost my social value. Yeah. And for me, inclusive growth is, of course, ultimately things have got to stack up. There has to be a business plan that makes it work. The only problem is, if all you're doing is looking at one side of the coin, which is the financial side of the coin, without the social side of the coin, then actually you're only limiting your profit. And history's shown us that, whether it be private business or whether it be the state, yeah, when you're doing bricks and mortar, you must do hearts and minds. It's two sides of the same coin.
So what I'm interested in is I want to pick your brain now about I want to pick your brain about bringing that into the site ready solutions model of getting people into an industry I was going to say it's in decline. It's obviously not in decline because the construction industry is huge, but the workers in the industry are in decline. We've got, in 10 years' time, we've got a real problem. I mean, at the moment, we've got a real problem
today.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But that problem is only going to get worse.
Yeah.
How do you see the transformation of that? Because what you've done in Barking and Dagenham, and and then now helping Harlow, and you're helping various other people, and that's a completely other. You were at Labour, you were the leader of the Labour, and now you're working with sort of the Harlow council. Is Dan Swords is the leader of that council, and he very very much a Conservative, and and actually fairly respected guy. What he's trying to do in Harlow, I think it's great, actually. And I know you wouldn't work with him if he wasn't. But how do you see that sort of breaking into an industry which is struggling to get the people?
Well, it's struggling because actually I think most people, when they think about the built environment sector, think about Alvida St. Pet. Right?
Well, maybe.
But
when
I talk about our generation,
yes,
right?
Well,
okay,
put me in your.
Okay. Sorry, I apologise. When I say our generation, I mean I am in that mid-50s,
for
right?
Sure, okay. For sure. Alvida St. Pet, when we were building in other countries,
absolutely, right. But it's the mindset, and the problem is, for too long now, we've said as a society, politically led, that you're only a success if you have wealth in financial terms, you have a degree, you buy your home and you have a nice car. Actually, that's never been the whole criteria. It's part of, if you want it to be, but there are great successful people that have very little money, right? And they will never, they'll never be Einstein, right? But you know what? In their lives, they're happy because actually within their community, they're regarded. To me, that's some sort of wealth. If people go and say, that person's a good person, and you said that about Dan, right? Now, I don't play political flags. I never have done. When I was in politics, I would work across all parties. I would make sure that what we were trying to do was to actually empower people and benefit people, regardless of the politics. And I think sometimes politics and politicians can be the biggest blockers if what they do is stay on their ideology rather than try and work through the practicality of solution-driven results. So when we look at this as a whole, right, we've got to look at what the problem is. Well, the problem is at the moment is the whole framing of the built environment sector is 30 years, maybe 40 years out of date because of a TV program that most of us watched, or if we didn't watch it, we've got our grandparents who did, right? So when someone says, oh, I want to go and work in the building trade, they go, oh, why do you want to do that? Dirty building site, terrible hours in all weathers, so on and so forth. Well, that's because that's their perception of how it is. Yeah? Because it's always about perception. Now, the truth is, you and I know there's probably over 200 different jobs you can do within the built environment sector.
Easily.
Yeah, easily, right? I did the top cards to try and break down those barriers because, again, not everyone's going to be Einstein. Yeah, not everyone's going to do further education. So what we need to do is say to people, look, there's nothing wrong. You can get a good living. This will help you and your family inspire for, forever. I wish I had some sort of proper skills, rather than what I did, as most people in my generation in Barking and Dagenham did, which was blag their way, go to school because they had to, and then go and get a blue-collar job, right? But the truth is, I was lucky enough to meet people. There's two types of education in this world. There's formal education, where you get a piece of paper that says you're clever. And then there's the social education. And a good, strong community will give you a better education than the institution. Because the institution is just about regurgitating facts, of whatever the institution says. And that's why the mindset changes over time on whatever. So if we look at, house building's been around since we left the caves. Yeah. But actually, the way we do house building has evolved, and it certainly is now, rightly so, that there's a lot more tech involved. And, so if I look at modular, and I was a big champion of modular construction, the modular construction of the 50s and 60s, which we're knocking down because actually isn't great.
That doesn't really work.
Right? But at that time, that was the technology and what we knew. But that gets tarnished. Today's technology gets tarnished with that. And what we've got to say is, well, no, actually, if you can have stuff built in a factory setting where the standards are higher, and you can bring that out onto a site, which means it's quicker, safer, and cheaper, and people can move into a property. I mean, I won't say which developer, but there's a company who I think are incredible, and they probably were the best example of British offsite manufacture that I'd seen. And I went to one of their sites, and they had, the building up and watertight within a week. You were living in the property within 3 months. Well, surely that's really good. That's what we should be looking at. That's what we should be investing in. Now, that doesn't mean the people working in that factory are any less important than the people that are out on site. Doesn't mean the people that designed the buildings are any more important than the people building it. Yeah. So it's about saying everyone has a value. Everyone has a position of what we can do to improve the situation. What we need to do is find ways to finance it. We need to find ways of getting people into it. Yeah. So, the Trump top cards, again, people laughed at me when I did that. But why did I do it? Well, I wanted those children to go home and play cards, a family get together in effect, where it started a conversation about going into the built environment industry. Yeah. Now, if you can do that, you start then changing the mindset. You start showing people the opportunities. When it's 1 in 8 jobs, when it's the biggest sector in the country.
So over 10% of jobs are in the construction, built environment.
Yeah.
That is mad.
Yeah. Well, it's incredible. When you think that we lead the world in design and engineering, yeah. So most of the great projects you're seeing around the globe are actually being designed here. Yeah. Now, wouldn't it be great if that young person has the ability to go and work on that project in whatever country of the world it is, in whatever guise that they're doing that, And that's the way I've always seen how we should approach. How do we empower people to get the most out of the opportunities that are in front of them? And that's what we need to start looking at with the built environment sector. But that does mean we've got to start knocking down some of the silos. We've got to start knocking down some of the myths. And we can do, and we will do. And, I think the built environment will absolutely turn around this country in the next decade if we think about it by empowering communities.
Yeah, that's what I hear from you in everything that you say, and it almost courses through your veins. The idea of community, and I think that is really powerful within the construction industry, because you do get that camaraderie, unlike any other industry I've ever been in. I've worked in quite a few, and I've worked, I did some stuff in the city, and I've done, I've worked for charities, I've worked for all sorts of stuff, but on site you rarely get. Or you get it nowhere else, the camaraderie of turning up with with the people that you're going to work with, whether that's boys or girls these days, and it's brilliant.
Yeah,
that's what I'm hearing from you. The way to close the skills gap is to build a stronger community, and that for us at Site Ready, or I say for us, I love what Site Ready does, and they happen to be a sponsor of the podcast and whatever, but. The idea of taking a mentor who is of the Auf Wiedersehen pet generation, who has the knowledge, who has the experience, who maybe doesn't have the pieces of paper, but has all of this social knowledge.
Absolutely.
And bringing people through the ranks, starting with someone who never thought they would have a job in construction.
Absolutely.
And making it productive. And that's what it's all about, Site Ready, making people productive from day one.
But that's the whole point,
because the sector needs it.
Yes.
The investment people need that.
Yeah.
Because there is no room for passengers on a construction site. You can't just walk around doing nothing.
Absolutely.
So you need them to be productive from day one.
And that's the point. So it's about bringing the two together. It's about bringing the empowerment of the community, and the technology of the industry, and bringing the two together, right? And then being honest with people, people can make mistakes. People can try out and think they can do X, and actually it means they can't do X, but they can do Y. Yeah, and if we were accepting that we're not going to be able to perfectly frame this, but for every mistake we'll have 100 successes. Yeah, where at the moment we've got 0. At the moment, no one's saying, "Oh, this is the place to be." Now, I personally, and I've said this to colleagues who did the detail on, it's all part of skills and stuff as well. I've already told you some of the ideas on, the idea in London to be able to have a travel card. Yeah, you can have free travel up until you leave school. And then you've got to pay for it if you're an apprentice. Well, that doesn't make sense to me. And if we've got all these multimillionaires who are willing to forgo they're not forever, they can do it in a 2-year stint, because that's normally an apprentice time period.
Or for as long as you're doing your apprenticeship.
Or as long as you're doing your apprenticeship. Whatever it works. That's just one way of helping, right? But where I'm coming to is we need a whole new mindset about the opportunity that the built environment can give to communities. So it can provide the skills opportunities. It can provide good environments to live in, places that inspire you. It can provide you with the ability to earn a wage that is very amenable to the lifestyle that you want to have. And lastly, it's aspirational, right? And I keep saying, and I find it really frustrating, why do we not have a built environment sector entity? We have lots of different entities, but actually, I and other people, we should be speaking with one voice in saying to government, we're your biggest sector. We expect you to help facilitate the ambition of the communities that we're trying to support. You claim you're doing that, well then start working with us, start listening to us and start investing in us. And at the moment, we haven't got that right. But if we could get that right, that would be so powerful. And look, I think developers, as a rule, and I say this hand on heart, they care about what they're doing. They care about the communities they're doing it in. Most developers of a certain level have foundations these days, have some sort of programs, and even the subbies, if there's something that needs to happen in the community and they hear about it, they'll help. I remember, looked after children or children whose parents are going to food banks. I remember, the local builders would hear about a situation, they would come in with loads of Easter eggs, if for argument's sake, or a load of presents or whatever. So I don't think it's all about profit. Of course, they've got to make a profit. Of course, they've got shareholders to pay, and investors to pay. I do believe the vast majority want to invest in people, and because again, there's that narrative, they build a site, they move on, they leave it alone. Yes, they do, because that's what the business model is. But actually, the social model is, what else have they done whilst they were there, and what is the legacy of what they did whilst they were there after? And that's the bit we need to measure. So yes, there's a financial return, but there's also that social return, skills and education. If we were able to if every person in the built environment sector, I hate the word levy, but if you said you had an amount that you would pay in to a pot that was ring fenced in bringing skills for the next generation into the industry, actually what you're doing is you're building a future for that industry and society.
Well, that is partly what the CITB do.
It is. It is.
But what you find is not many people know about it, or they do know about it and they feel begrudgingly about paying a levy, but they don't know how to draw that down and empower. But they're also it's a weird circle. They don't. And again, that's what Site Ready's really trying to do. It's the attraction. It's that's the first sort of step.
The problem is there isn't a golden thread.
No.
Right? So at the moment, the industry is talking with many different voices, and they're all talking the right language. They're not talking as a choir.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like having, if I use the football being on West Ham, right? You can have 11 talented players on the pitch, right? They could be the best in their field, right?
It's unlikely at West Ham. Also a West Ham fan, very frustrated. We won't go there this season.
Don't worry, I'm always an optimist. We won the World Cup for the country.
There you go. We'll hark back to 66. Yeah, why not?
The only time it's ever been won. And it was Barking and Dagenham that won it, by the way. So it was Bobby Moore and Sir Alf Ramsey, both good borough lads. Jimmy Greaves was in borough as well.
I met Jimmy Greaves.
He was a great lad. He lived not too far away from where I live.
Nice.
Yeah. And I say the first Black England captain was Paul Ince. Again, good Dagenham lad.
Yeah.
I gave him the freedom of the borough. But what I'm saying is you could be the best, and you see this. If I take, teams that have done really, really well, then all of a sudden they've crashed. Man United, you could say that sort of happened to them as a team. I mean, they were running high for a very long time. But what happens is, once you lose that chemistry, once you lose that team ethic, it don't matter how good you are individually, you're not collectively. If we take West Ham at the moment, we know we can do better, but it's about building a system, having the right pieces in place to be able to make sure that people can aspire the best they can aspire. And I find it really interesting because this football to me is a bit like life. Yeah, if you work as a team, you get to the top. If you work as a group of individuals, you'll always struggle. And that's what I'm saying about the sector today. Look, I'm a small limited company. I'm me. I've had the honour of working in the public sector, serving a community beyond Barking and Dagenham. So as I say, I did it for London and parts of the country. And to be able to have time to think these things through, I now, as a small limited company, I now support other companies trying to think and institutions like local government to think about how we're going to build what matters to communities in a way that supports industry. Yeah. But ultimately, I've come on your show today and I've told you about how big this industry is. Ultimately, what I want to see, and as I say, I'm not even a cog. I'm a screw in the cog, of this industry that has the ability to change so much about our country and our communities. And what we need to do now is start working out how, whilst all these other, it's like a triangle. You notice I keep going on with triangles.
Triangle. Do you know it's the strongest shape?
It is indeed, and it's the roof over your head.
Exactly.
Right, and that's part of one of my inclusive growth pieces. If you ever come on my one of my workshops, you'll hear me go, "Be a 5-year-old again." You'll love it. But it's about saying at the top of the triangle is an entity, and that's called the built environment sector. Yeah. But every part, there's triangles within triangles, yeah? So every part is crucial. And if one part is lost, then the triangle is no longer the strongest shape, yeah? But actually, it's about what we're talking about. It's putting roofs over people's heads, giving people the ability to have a home that's warm and safe and truly affordable to them, have the same values within a community of which they live, yeah? And then give them an aspiration for the future. And to me, that's what we're trying to do in that triangle. And as I say, we're all part of that team. So I think it's a really exciting time for the industry. I think it's a tough time, but I think we've got to start talking with one voice where we can start making demands on government. Because I think at the moment, whilst we have these different triangles pitching their different parts, we're not going to the top. And that means that government can say, yeah, we're going to do this bit, but we're not going to do that bit. And what we need to be able to say is, well, no, this is
do this. We're the triangle. You can't take a bit.
That's it.
You have to have it all.
Yes, right? Because actually, if you want this to work, if you want growth in this country, you need to do this, this, and this to allow us to do this, this, and this. Yeah? And it's quite interesting. We're still not quite doing that yet. But I'm hoping, you never know, there could be a built environment sector entity. And obviously, I've got a very large mouth. I'll keep championing.
Yeah. Well, I'd love that. It's brilliant. I love it. I've got two things for you. If you could change one thing about regeneration, how regeneration is done in Britain, one thing, just because otherwise we'll be here for another 4 hours. One thing, what would that be and why? In a nutshell. We don't have to. We're not writing War and Peace. We're just one thing that you would change and why.
I would want it to be recognised that whilst there is a financial return, there has to be a social return.
Okay.
In all build, and that has to go through all the sectors as well. Yeah. Okay. So we have a problem at the moment where trust is always a problem. The community doesn't trust the developer. The developer has a trust issue with the local authority, and we see that with 106 and Seal.
Yeah.
So for me, it would be about showing that yes, there is a development that's going to be built, and yes, these people are going to make profit, but actually there's also a social investment going on here, and that needs to be much more poignant in the whole conversation. So actually people can't just go as alleged, land bank or build and run. We need that ability to have a much more the golden thread of both the profit and the social brought together.
Okay. And the last thing is, it's a closing tradition that we have. If you could have anyone sat in your chair right now, chatting to me, having a conversation about anything, who would you pick? And then I might try and get them on, or we can try and get them on.
Wow. Who would I pick? That's a good question, really. Can I go for two? Can I be gender?
I mean, you can go for two if you want.
Can I go for two? Because I like to be gender equal.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's my old feminist hat on. I would go for two people if you've not had them on already. One is Rob Perrin of Barclay, because I think, again, going back to Tony and Rob has been part of the whole legacy of Barclay and what they've been about, which is very much making profit but building community. I think he would be good. And then the other person I would ask is Fiona Fletcher-Smith, who is the head of L&Q. And again, she was at the GLA. And I know both of these people, I would like to say we're friends. And the reason why I'd say her is because she's been in the institutions of local government and the whole regional government and how that world works. At the same time, she runs what L&Q, which is one of the largest,
huge.
Yeah, one of the largest, RSLs. But she's very mindful about skills and future and community and the sector. So for me, if it's one person, you need to do both.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. And thank you. Honestly, thank you so much for coming on. It's been passionate, actually. You're super passionate, and I hope that comes through in what's been said today, because it's rare that you have someone so passionate about community and bringing people together and just being social, and not in the derogatory way, in the very positive, being social, looking at people as social beings rather than just the monetary value they bring.
So, as I say, I was brought up to believe everyone had a value. And if we can help them find their value, it will improve society, which in turn improves business. And this is not new thinking. It's been going on for hundreds of years. And the good businesses invest in people. The bad businesses just make profit. Yeah. Actually, you can make profit and invest in people and improve society. And I believe today's, like I did yesterday, and I will do hopefully tomorrow, that I'm still on this earth, that, we still have the opportunity, no matter how dark the days seem, to be able to make a difference to the individual, the family, the community, and society. So I hope that the built environment sector understands its worth, starts speaking with one voice, and, things like this carry on being the conversation of tomorrow. So thank you very much, Sam.
Thank you, mate.